Thank you, Scott, and good evening, everybody. Welcome. Glad you're here. We'll see. It's the holiday season, so the crowd may vary in size, but I'm glad everybody that's here could make it tonight. As Scott mentioned, we open usually with some education. It's been on my mind. I wanted to talk about one of the things that I think a lot of our guys struggle with when they get into recovery, and that is building intimacy skills. I think it's the one thing that people want. That's certainly a necessary aspect of rebuilding the relationship, if that's the decision the couple wants to go in. But I have found, and having lived this myself as a recovering addict, I don't think I just missed those those skills somehow. And I think the addiction, just the way it literally works in the brain, kind of cuts off those areas of the brain that help us have empathy and compassion, and it's part of the denial of the addiction. And it can get complicated, but the bottom line is that when we get into recovery, oftentimes we have the intention, we have the goodwill, we have the desire, but oftentimes we don't have the skills. And so I just wanted to just name 7 kind of categories of skills that we find are important with intimacy. We can talk about these in more detail. The first is just self-knowledge, right? I can't be intimate with you or somebody else if I don't really know myself. And if I know my dark spots and my strengths and my weaknesses, and sort of know where I guess another kind of psychology would say where my shadows are, to be able to really determine, what's going on with me. And that means maybe healing trauma that has, and oftentimes trauma, by the way, is the source that really interrupts this ability to connect with people. Because if you experience trauma or even neglect or even bullying, kind of trauma with the lowercase t, we would say, that can really result in this belief that I can't trust anybody, I can't ever be vulnerable, I can't open up, I can't let you know the real me. And all those, of course, are essential skills for intimacy. And so really knowing ourselves is the first step. The second is kind of being what I call interdependent, learning how to go from a me to a we, learning how to operate as a unit, learning how to be a good listener, learning how to depend on somebody else for help, learning how to ask for help, learning to know what our needs are. So it's really kind of living from this very solitary stance that the addict has, often really built around protecting their addiction, toward living as a unit. If people choose to do that in a relationship, they are living with somebody else, and there's a certain level of interdependence that requires you to show up, to be responsible, just to be present in the relationship. And of course, many partners will tell you, an addict is certainly not present in a relationship. They're gone, usually by several layers gone. So that interdependence is really important. Caring about your person, your partner, compassion, empathy. These are the skills, of course, that we're talking about that are so hard to believe. But we try to help our clients move from what we call cognitive empathy, which is like, yeah, I know I should feel bad, but I'm not quite feeling it. I know what I've done must cause you terrible pain or cause you a lot of hurt, but I still can't kind of feel it in my gut or my heart or my throat. That's what we call cognitive empathy. We know what we should think, but then we want to move that and shift that into emotional empathy, really feeling it. Yeah, if I've caused my partner a lot of hurt and pain, if I'm truly having empathy and compassion, I'm feeling that pain too. And that really is what keeps people bonded. But allowing us to get in sync with our partner like that takes a lot of trust and some work. But that care is important, which leads us to trust, right? Opening the door. I mentioned already abuse and all kinds of neglect and other kinds of issues that happen to kids who happen to grow up to be addicts, often really interfere with our ability to have the ability to form trusting, caring, mutually dependent relationships. Most addicts are not wired for trust, and most of us had early childhood survival strategies that didn't call for being vulnerable to whatever situation we found ourselves in. So we need to, basically, as part of the intimacy skills too, learning how to develop skills where we can have a sense of protecting ourselves, where we're not wide open and vulnerable to everybody, but we can also let people in. We can also drop those walls enough to be able to connect with somebody else. And I think that's really critical as well. I think just 3 more here. 1, responsiveness. being aware of somebody else's feelings and needs. I remember working with a partner once early on when I was doing this work, and the whole kind of dynamic of a traumatized partner was still new to me. And it was becoming very real very fast. But I remember a partner saying, when asked what she wanted from her husband in recovery, said she wanted to be courted again. She wanted to have somebody who was interested in her, what she's feeling, what she's doing, what she's thinking. Just nothing superhuman or superpowers, just take an interest, right? Be there, show up, be engaged. And I think that kind of what I'm calling responsiveness is a really key aspect. Finally, then mutuality. I mentioned this already, kind of moving from an I to a we, becoming a unit, becoming a team. And I think that can be a leap for an addict because we don't, as they say, have those skills. And by the way, and this is something that partners maybe have a hard time grasping, is that ability to form that relationship, the trust, the openness, the empathy, compassion really starts in a place like LA, Seeking Integrity, where these guys sit in groups all day, hour after hour, really being vulnerable and opening up. And those are the skills they need when they go home. So the work of learning compassion, empathy is really happening, even though it's not an intimate relationship. They're learning how to relate to other people, and that's really essential. And then finally, commitment. Moving to this aspect of more sustained engagements, more sustained responsibility, really showing up and being present. So those are some ideas. This is work that we often can't really start in the middle of treatment. We only have tops 4 weeks, often just maybe 2 or 3 weeks with guys. So we do the basics of kind of breaking through denial and laying the groundwork. But these are the tasks that really need to keep going and continuing in treatment. So I just wanted to run those down. I also wanted to take advantage to let you know that we've just opened up another level 1 course for intimacy skills for men in recovery. This is one that I created. I'm teaching it myself. It starts January 2nd. It's 6 weeks. It's a work group format that some of you may be familiar with already. These are weekly groups of 90 minutes with a workbook facilitated by me in this case. And the level 1 is intimacy skills. Level 2 is healthy sexuality. But I think we did a very successful healthy intimacy this fall, and we don't have quite enough people to move on to healthy sexuality yet. So we're opening up that first level again on January 2nd. So you can find out more information at Seeking Integrity. And with that, I'll stop the shameless self-promotion and we can move on to the webinar. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do. Took the headphones off.
Yeah, you're good.
As you were talking, this is one that always resonates with me. Going from me to we. I watch sometimes the Home and Garden channel where they're, house shopping and things like that. And there's always a couple. And if it's a man and a woman, about 75% of the time, the man uses I, my, me, and the woman will use we, our, us. And it drives me nuts. I'm like, why is the woman in a relationship and the man is not?
Wow.
Is this common, or is it just sex addicts who do this, or is it men in general? Am I being sexist by saying guys do this and women don't? I mean,
there are some differences in kind of men and women and how we're wired a little bit. I think women tend to be more effective at communicating and processing and talking about stuff, and that's the kind of thing that a lot of men hate to do. And that's one example that we see quite frequently. But I think very often men are like, okay, let's fix this, let's get a solution, let's move on, right? And it's that kind of I mentality. Let's drop into action, as opposed to processing feelings or talking about it. So I don't think it's just sex addicts. I think there's a cultural aspect here that's really important to recognize. So I think in many ways, when we ask men to develop intimacy skills, compassion, empathy, there are some, of course, that do that, but I think in many cases it's kind of a new part of the brain that we're stretching here to try to get that done. And there's a challenge. I've said several times where addicts typically grow up not trusting, not being vulnerable, and when we move from this me to a we have to figure out, okay, how can I be open to my partner and connected and present and, reliable and a team player, but not get overwhelmed, not get enmeshed, not get so in each other's business that it's unhealthy, right? So there's kind of a Cinderella point, I guess, the perfect, perfect fit where we're connected, we're close, we're mutually, working as a team, but we're not also so enmeshed that it's unhealthy, that we're in each other's business all the time. And finding that balance is not easy for anybody, for men or women. But I think men tend to have an extra step they have to do with getting into that we mentality, for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this comes up a lot in conflict situations. As a matter of fact, in our respectful conflict agreement, it's posted on our website. Just type in search in the search feature on either website, Seeking Integrity or Sexual Relationship Healing, type in respectful conflict. And it's like rules for when you're fighting, basically, like how to do it productively and without, wanting to get a divorce over it. Right. And one of the rules is we agree that we are partners, we're on the same team. Instead of fighting each other, we're going to fight the problem. And I think 9 times out of 10, when we go into an argument, even with someone we love, and we want to resolve a problem, we start fighting the person instead of the problem. And it's because we see me instead of we.
Right. Right. One of the things we talk about in the work group are attachment styles, and the so-called perfect attachment style is what's called secure attachment, meaning just what you just said, that I can have an argument with my partner, but I know that we're strong enough, we can each have different opinions, and we're going to end up still being a healthy couple with without disaster, right? Because our relationship can take conflict or disagreement, and we know we can come back to center. And I think that's some relationships don't have that secure feeling about them, right? That they feel very brittle. That if we really have a conflict, it's all going to break apart. And I think that's where couples really have to work toward finding that ability to. And of course, every couple has conflict, right? The goal is not to have no conflict, because that's just not realistic. But so the as you mentioned, the goal is to really figure out, how do we do this in a healthy way that's not destructive, and that's really effective. Yeah.
Thank you. We have some questions left over from last week, and I think the week before, because I forgot to bring them up. Okay. So let's do these first. So the first question here is, my husband and I are both in recovery. He is wanting for us to be sexually active after several months of no activity. Getting past the awkwardness of reconnecting after so long is challenging. I know you recommend sensate focus exercises, but do you have any suggestions on how to work through the awkwardness? I mean, sensate focus is about reconnecting emotionally and then physically and also a lot of other stuff. But the awkwardness is the specific question.
Right. And yeah, so people don't know, sensate focus is a Masters and Johnson exercise. You just Google it, it's everywhere. There's protocols. It's a very effective one to reconnect physically, right? This awkwardness is a big deal, because people are sometimes expressing needs and wants and feelings for the first time. And that feels weird to many people, including these guys that we have in treatment who come out who are not good at understanding what they need and what they want. Their addiction has been driving that, and it's been kind of a not reality based in many ways. And so it's all around. I have found, in addition to like just getting out of the performance-based idea of sex, right, that it has to be acrobatic and pornographic, if you will, like a porn tape. It just, sex is meant to be fun and connecting, and and it doesn't always work out well, and sometimes it's funny, and just it's real, right? And so I think just to manage your expectations of what it's going to be like, first of all, but second, just to really talk about it. I think that's where, if couples can share their awkwardness, if they can share their embarrassment, if they can laugh about stuff, I think so what I'm saying, I think if you guys can get in the habit, and I recommend this to all my clients, a daily check-in, right, where you can at least talk about feelings, processes, what's going on. Gee, this is what I struggle with today. This is what I felt good about. This is what I see in terms of our relationship. Just that open communication can really go a long way. And I think we have to go beyond the superficial. When people are in treatment, because it's an uncontrolled situation, we often tell people when they're talking to their spouse, news, weather, sports, really very superficial stuff. When you get home, you have to start rebuilding the depth of the relationship, and even rebuilding maybe a stretch, because a lot of couples think have never had it before. So in many ways, these are learning stuff for the first time. It's not reclaiming, it's learning how to do this for the first time. But I think communication, being honest, open, vulnerable in how you talk to each other, listening, I think that can go a long way. And touch, and then this is maybe goes back to sensate focus. You don't have to do all the progressive toward, sensate goes toward increasing levels of intimacy, right? You can take your own time with this. I think just touch, explore touch without trying to get into performative aspects of sex or even sex itself. Just reconnect in a very gentle way. And I think if you check in with each other, it can really help the awkwardness. Again, I think also we were talking just now about going from this like me to we mentality. And I think that can also help with this awkwardness. It's like if my partner and I are working through how to reconnect in a way that's more satisfying for both of us, there's no expert, there's no right and wrong, there's no black and white, and we have to work as a team. And I think the more you can just kind of connect and listen and be patient, not only with your partner, but with yourself, I think we jump almost all right away to the expectations and the performance aspect and putting ourselves in. Remember, sex addicts may not be visible on the surface, but they're carrying a boatload of shame inside. And so if that shame gets touched, it's going to kind of blow up and shut them down. So we want to try to avoid that, but try to be real. And so I just think communication and touch, I guess those are the watchwords I would say about that.
Yeah. And when you set up the healthy intimacy and sexuality work groups, level 1 is all about healthy intimacy and level 2 is all about healthy sexuality. You did it
no
in
accidents.
That reason. And can you explain a little bit about the difference between intimacy and sexuality, just real quick, so everybody knows exactly what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so one of the very first things we do in that work group is look at contrast, right? Sexuality versus sensuality, the whole feeling range. Intensity versus intimacy. A lot of sex addicts confuse the intensity with this is intimacy, and really looking at the idea of intimacy being an emotional connection that is essential to have healthy sexuality. So it's not, the sex really follows, and that's really significant here. It's not by accident that the healthy sexuality, which is that physical and emotional and even sometimes spiritual connecting with another person, that just doesn't happen. That happens on top of some intimacy skills that are already there. The connection, the relationship, the trust, right? Intimacy is all about open vulnerability, trust, and that is in place. And if that's in place, the sexuality really kind of follows as well. Although there's a whole other group of things I think a lot of addicts don't, despite a lot of sexual experiences, I think most addicts really don't know too much about healthy sexuality. So there's a lot to be covered in that second work group as well. But there's a reason that it comes second, for sure.
Yeah, and I think you can have sex without intimacy. You can have intimacy without sex. Ideally, in a romantic relationship, sex is an expression of the intimacy that already exists. I mean, that's kind of how I view it. Anyway.
Right. And I think, one of the tragedies in sex addiction is that there's a separation of kind of emotional connection and, for lack of a better word, lust, right? The pure sexual drive. And sometimes those two get separated. And that's a very painful situation for a couple.
With sex addicts. I mean,
particularly so. Yes, exactly.
The one compartment and
exactly. And part of the recovery, and that's why I think both Dr. Rob and I are both CSATs and sex therapists, because they're two just slightly different approaches, but they're really to deal with how do we heal the whole package, not just one or the other.
Yeah, thank you. Normally I take our questions in order, which means last week's and then this week's in order, but I'm going to skip ahead because one of them came in and it just has to be asked. So I heard that relationships are unhealthy once we can't take care of ourselves and our own needs. So is going from me to we always healthy? I tend to overdo the me instead of we in the past. Thanks for your insight. So I think this person is worried now about overdoing the we instead of the me.
Right. So I touched on this slightly, but let me expand on that, because when we intentionally set out to create kind of a healthy coupleship, it takes some real effort, because we're connecting. I mean, I already talked a lot about vulnerability, open. So assuming we can do that, we can connect with our partner. Then there's this level of, okay, how much do I connect? How much do we merge? And how much do we stay separate? And I think this is maybe the point you're talking about. Like, yeah, we can become a we, but what does that mean? And it doesn't mean that I lose myself. What about my needs, my individual needs, my wants? What about your individual needs and your wants? And I talk about DBT a lot in this webinar, but there's a great set of exercises in DBT, like I want, you want, and it sounds like, you know, kindergarten stuff, but it's a skill that's really important in especially with recovering addicts, to figure out, okay, this is me, this is my need. And by the way, we have to contrast needs versus wants. You know, needs are needs and wants are somewhat optional, I guess. But what's most important for me, and how do if we have differences of opinion, where do my needs fit, and where, you know, and your opinions, and how do we meet halfway somehow? So I think it takes a lot of negotiation, takes a lot of communication, a lot of boundary setting. You know, both parties have to have boundaries about this is not okay for me. No, you know, this is, I need this, or I need that, or I don't need that. And I think so, you know, you want to, the challenge for any couple moving into this we thing, and it's, I think the gist of your question is, how do we avoid enmeshment when, okay, we've gone too far, you know, we are merged. I was joking around a couple of weeks ago, you know, with my partner going to a Christmas party. I said, no, we don't want to be that couple that dresses, you know, the same way with the same, no. But so I think that's maybe merging, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but, you know, too much. Or how do we maintain our individuality in this sense of being a couple? I think that's the big challenge. And that takes some sophistication in terms of being able to identify our needs, our wants, to be able to listen, to be able to bend a little bit, to be able to give, and so on. So it sounds easy, but it's not. And your question is right on target, because it's not just a matter of saying, okay, now it's us, because it takes a lot more kind of under the surface to make that work.
Yeah, and I mean, just to throw some terms out, a lot of people are familiar with the term codependency, and a lot of people are familiar with the term prodependence. You know, codependency, at least theoretically, and there are lots of definitions, but is when we are so focused on the other person that we lose ourselves. Prodependence is we don't lose ourselves, but we care for the other person because we choose to. A prodependent relationship, I fill in your weak spots, or you fill in my weak spots. We're better together than apart, but I'm still me and you're still you. And, you know, I don't have to, you know, take up knitting just because you like knitting, or, you know, and you don't have to play softball just because you don't even have to come to my games, but I still need to go play softball because I enjoy that. And I need that, just like you need to knit. Not that David knits, or, you know, do you knit, David?
I don't, although it's supposed to be really good for your mental health. So, but I don't.
There we go. I don't know. So anyway, yeah, I thought that was such a good question, and it was so on point for what we're talking about today.
Oh God, yeah. And again, you know, this is why this is really tough, because we have certain kind of people who are more dependent, right? That they depend on other people to kind of help them figure out what they want and need. And so I think to make a healthy relationship, we have to both be in balance and come together in balance and maintain it, and despite a lot of forces pushing us one way or the other.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump back to the questions that have been waiting for a couple of weeks here. So this is from a porn addict, sex addict. How do you create transparency with your betrayed partners? How does an addict know if something is important and he needs to share it with his betrayed spouse? I've always found it difficult to figure this out. And that has sometimes when I've shared or not shared, it's triggered my betrayed spouse. So how do you know what needs to be shared and what doesn't need to be shared?
I think for most addicts that I've worked with and myself, I think early on, I had no internal mechanism to figure that out. I couldn't trust my decision-making process on that. It's like, oh, that's not important. Well, maybe it was key to everything, but I was just like dismissing it. Or maybe part of me didn't, out of shame or whatever, didn't want to really tell you that piece because I'm embarrassed about that. So I think I have really relied on other people, sponsors, peers, therapists, friends, to run it by and get an outside opinion of somebody that's not emotionally involved. And that doesn't mean I have to share everything and I can't make a decision on my own, but I just don't trust myself sometimes. My rule of thumb is to if there's a doubt, to be more open than not, right? To not withhold, to just put it out there, because I don't really, especially in early recovery, motives are hard to trust. And so I think just to really put it out, if there's a question, consult, about what to do. Because again, there's some principles here. We don't want to cause harm, but we also don't want to be deceiving or hold back or be manipulative. So again, these are all different kind of forces that have to be balanced out. But the bottom line for me, I consult. I have a pretty good opinion at this point. I've been in recovery a long time, but still, if there's a question, if there's a doubt, a conflict, I'll always check it out with somebody.
Yeah.
Scott, how would you answer that? What about you?
I would give that exact same answer, but I would have prefaced it with, if you think your betrayed partner might want to know, you probably need to disclose it.
Yeah.
And then if you're not sure, go check it with somebody, and maybe go check it with somebody anyway. But in a general way, if you think your betrayed partner wants to know or might want to know, it's probably something that your betrayed partner wants to know.
Right.
Even if it's hurtful. And like you said, most of us don't want to give the bad news. We'd rather not. Oh, and our denial kicks in and we say, I don't want to hurt her or him, so I'm just going to not tell them that. It comes back and bites you in the rear end.
And the pain is that much worse on everybody. You can't do that.
Yes.
Can't do it. Yeah, I totally agree. Just that ability to just sort of when in doubt, share. I think it's really important.
Yeah. Okay, next one here. I have a lot of regret. I've had a lot of bad experiences. I've lost a lot. This makes it very difficult to think about gratitude. What steps should I take to practice and work my way toward gratitude? Great question.
Good for you, first of all. And I think, boy, it's true that gratitude, when I most need it, is like the farthest thing away from what I want to do. It just feels so unnatural, because part of me, when I'm in pain or in doubt or feeling like a victim or hang on to resentment or whatever negative state I might be in, is really, that has a certain gravity that kind of keeps me stuck in there. And the thought of kind of moving out of it with gratitude seems just like artificial, and I want to roll my eyes and like, oh, come on, and get sarcastic. But if I can just force myself to do it, and I guess this is my answer to your question, I don't think it's a big, complicated process. I would just do it. I would sit down and make a list of things, and just go for it, and get in the habit of doing it. Because I think the therapeutic benefit, the magic, if you will, is in the action of doing it itself. And part of it, I have to talk myself into doing it. Now at least I know how good I'll feel on the other side. And so that's a great motivator for me to just jump into it and not hesitate. But I remember before just kind of wanting, do I really want to do that? I mean, that seems stupid. All the judgmental stuff is stupid. Like, but boy, it does work. So I guess short answer, I wouldn't worry too much about trying to build yourself up or hype it up to do it. I would just take out a pen and paper and do it.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of gratitude lists too. I do one every day. And on the days when I forget to do it by about 10 a.m., I'm usually unpleasant, and I remember, oh, I was in a hurry this morning. I just need to pause and do a gratitude list and start over. And it really helps. So let's see. I am confused about whether I am a porn addict or whether I just have a bad habit. How can I figure this out? I am well aware of my porn use as very compulsive and very destructive to my current and past life. I have been in and out of recovery for many years and not able to fix the situation. How can I know whether I am addicted or not? I love that question. You're on, David.
Well, I remember a client once who came into my office and said, I can't be an alcoholic because I went 365 days without a drink. And just that the way they stated it, right? I mean, no person who's not an alcoholic counts 365 days between drinks. Just the fact you've talked about wrestling with this thing for years, on again, off again, in recovery, not in recovery, trying to figure it out. I mean, all of that basically says to me that, yeah, you welcome to the club, right? You're there. There are some, criteria. That's not, we just don't make this up based on our feelings, but it sounds like you don't mention exactly what kind of complications it's created in your life. But, when we try to cut back and we can't, right? And when we try to limit it, when we start having impacts on our social functioning, our daily life that this pulls us away from. And so there's other kind of basic criteria that sounds like you're, checking the boxes there. So I wonder if this is just kind of some last vestige of denial that you need to kind of break through and really jump into recovery, because the space you're in, I spent a couple of years in that space. In my own addiction, I'm not a porn addict, but with drugs and alcohol, and it was torture. It was really torture because I knew at some level I was, but I couldn't face it, and I was like trying and not trying, and so I would maybe just jump in with both feet, because it sounds to me like you are. Scott, what do you think?
A really good friend of mine, when I first met him, he was coming to AA meetings, but he wasn't sure he was an alcoholic. So over lunch one day, I started asking questions, and he said, "But I'm very controlled with my drinking." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, I never drive drunk." And I said, "Okay, tell me about that." He said, "Well, I went to the DMV and I got their chart that says how many drinks you can have in a certain amount of time and still be okay to drive. And I carry that with me so that if I'm in my car, I never drink too much." Now, this was after he had fallen face down on a curb and like split his face in half like a week before. So he still had stitches in his face from his drinking. And I was like, normal people don't do that. Normal people don't need to look at the chart and say, okay, in 10 minutes I can have another drink and not. And it's like, this is, if you're keeping track. Another friend once said, "Oh, I cut my drinking in half." I said, "How?" He said, "Well, I don't drink before 5 o'clock anymore." And he thought that meant he wasn't an alcoholic, that he didn't start drinking before 5 and cut his drinking in half by doing that. I was like, oh dear. He recently died of liver failure, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people who aren't addicted don't worry if they're addicted. Pure and simple. I mean, if you're worried that you're addicted, you're probably addicted. And David nailed it with the criteria. I mean, there's 11 criteria in the DSM-5 centered around use disorders. They don't use the word addiction. Any 2 of which is enough to diagnose. But in the real world, we use 3 criteria. One of them is preoccupation to the point of obsession. We think about it a lot. We create space for it. We create time for it. We create privacy for it with pornography. The second one is we've tried and failed to quit multiple times. Meaning, I go online and I say, I'm just going to go online for 5 minutes. I'm going to get on, get off, get on with my day, basically. And 3 hours later, I'm still looking at porn. Or, I say, I'm never looking at porn again. And for 3 days, I'm really good. And then something happens and I get in an argument and I'm having a bad day and I'm stressed out and my denial kicks in. I think, well, just this once. And then I'm back at it. Back in the day when I was an active addict, Porn was not as available, so porn addicts, we collected it. We had like external hard drives and things, and we would delete our collection, and then a week later we go back and try and rebuild it. And when we feel bad again, and delete it. If you're doing stuff like that, this is a bad sign. And then any consequences, relational consequences are obvious. I'm talking with my hands and you can't see me, it drives me nuts. Relational consequences, trouble at work or school. And this can be even things like, you know, even if you don't get caught looking at porn at work, guess what you're not doing at work? Working. So you're not going to get a promotion. You're not going to get a big raise. You know, those are consequences. And then there's a lot of shame wrapped around it, and depression and anxiety. You know, and when I say relationship problems as a consequences, I'm not talking about just I'm in a relationship and I'm distancing from my partner, and my partner is asking me constantly, what's wrong? Have I done something to push you away? All that kind of stuff. I see guys all the time in my porn addiction work group who are not in a relationship and have never been in a relationship because porn is their relationship. That's a huge consequence. They're just so separated from the world that, I mean, our topic today is intimacy. They don't know how to be emotionally intimate with another human being, let alone sexually intimate. So yeah, pretty straightforward. But yeah, if you're asking, if you're sitting here saying, I'm not sure I'm a porn addict, the answer is you're a porn addict.
Yeah, I agree.
People who aren't addicted, don't worry if they're addicted. Okay, one more here from the old batch. I'm an addict in recovery. During arguments with my betrayed partner, if I forget to say something that I should say, or I say it wrong, my partner gets angry and says, why do I have to explain everything to you? Why can't you just know this naturally? How can I respond to this in a way that won't upset my partner further?
Yeah, it's a tough scenario there. Because partners do kind of want to know this. And I think sometimes, as I said, the skill level and early on in terms of just people skills and knowing, speaking as a early recovering addict now, as the clients we see, for example, in treatment, coming out, they don't have the skills for being open or vulnerable, or even knowing what they want or need, or certainly knowing how to communicate it. So there's a lot of awkwardness there. And I think there's frustration on the part of the partners who want a more effective kind of self-awareness and communication that's just not there sometimes. So I think, again, daily check-ins, because sometimes when we're in the heat of the moment on these kind of events, it can get escalated. There are wrong things to be said. You can get to an argument. But I think in the cooler, maybe calmer part of a check-in, you can talk about just kind of, I think what is reassuring to partners is kind of some insight into your process, like what's going on with you, because they're just seeing the external behavior. And I think the behavior may be a little bit slower, frustrating and slow to change as you gain your skills. But what you can do is share, gee, this is what happened to me when you said that. This is where I went. This is what I was trying to say, and sort of process it that way. Just to kind of, I think if we can show partners what's happening, maybe some people expect perfection, but none of us do this perfectly. But what we can do is, when we don't do it perfectly, we can be honest about what just happened, and we can get help from our sponsor and our therapist and our peers. But we can also share with our partner, hey, look, this is what kind of put me off the rails a little bit there, and this is what I did about it, and this is where I'm at now, and this is what I've learned. But I think that kind of honesty is really important, and I think that's probably the best way to counteract some of this, like, well, why don't you just do this, or why don't you just say it? Because it's not quite that easy. But I think you also owe it to your partner to be able to say, well, this is really what's going on inside, as opposed to just saying, get off my back or leave me alone. We owe it to be transparent as much as we can. But I think it's I think just the patterns of daily communication, I can't emphasize how important that is. And I'll just the metaphor, the analogy I used when I was in recovery myself, I was really bad at making phone calls to my sponsor on good days. And, and so when a bad day came, so how can I call this guy? Well, I only call my problems. I never call him when I'm feeling good. So I didn't call at all. And I got in trouble, myself, not with him, but with my addiction. So I think just having that routine practice of ongoing communication when things are not even great, but when things are decent and not in a crisis, that really builds a lot of good faith to talk about these things.
Yeah, and not necessarily in defense of addicts, but I was told early on in recovery, when we start the first vestiges of our addiction, we stop growing emotionally. So we end up, I got into recovery in my 30s, and I was still basically a 12-year-old kid emotionally. I mean, I just stopped developing, the social skills that non-addicts naturally have. And of course, as a betrayed partner, if you naturally have those social skills, and why doesn't this person you married have those social skills? Well, because he's been an addict since he was 12 or 13 or 14. He doesn't know how to be honest. He doesn't know how to be vulnerable. Those things scare him, and I had to learn things that other people all, learned as kids. I had to learn them as an adult. And people would get frustrated with me sometimes. Why can't you control your emotions? I don't know how. I'm learning. And I think it's okay to say, I don't know how to do what you're asking, but I promise I'll work on it, or something. I mean, I think it's okay to say that, But,
I agree, totally.
Okay, type some more questions in for us. We got through all the old questions. So I'm getting into today's, but I only have one that we haven't answered for today. So type a couple more in for us. Okay, my husband seemed to have the skills, we're talking intimacy skills, until he became involved in internet, webcams, chat rooms, and porn. Can that cause an addiction without trauma? Oh, can just getting into internet, webcams, and chat rooms and porn, can that cause an addiction without early life trauma? Can their adult behavior trump upbringing that can cause addiction? I'm reading into this because
yeah.
But I think the question here is, can just exposure to porn and chat rooms, can that cause addiction, or is there trauma there? And also, I'm going to add a question. A lot of people do have skills, and then when we become addicts, we sort of shut down those skills. So can you elaborate, please?
Yeah. So kind of as a rule of thumb, the belief is that there's usually some adverse situation in the lives of addicts that kind of that bump them off kind of the normal developmental trajectory, if you will, and they kind of develop these skills or coping mechanisms to deal with stuff in lieu of skills, really. Now, when you're talking about really high dopamine, high adrenaline content like porn, sex addiction, even strong amphetamines like meth, there's some talk that those are so strong in and of themselves that they can kind of create this compulsive pattern. People that aren't necessarily from a traumatized background or from neglect or some other kind of history that we often see, that they could be vulnerable to kind of getting into the habit of this dopamine rush and adrenaline rush that you get from certain behaviors. Are there people like that? I'm sure there are. I think, speaking with a broader brush, most people that develop those problems are drawn to the high dopamine, adrenaline, neurotransmitter content of the reward, if you will, of those behaviors, because it provides some relief from something. And I think where I've seen, kind of maybe to drill down in your question a little bit, with these kinds of sex and porn addicts, sometimes we see with people who are what we call sensation seekers, This could go with ADHD. It could go with other kinds of backgrounds where our people have a real short attention span. They can't tolerate boredom. They can't tolerate short periods, and they jump into things. Sometimes there's the gateway drug is video games, which trains so yeah, there are different kind of doorways or access points, on ramps, if you will, to this. But I think, for the most part, there's still usually something in that person's background that made this losing themselves in these activities appealing. Could it happen otherwise? Yeah, of course it could. But I think for the most part, we don't see that. We see usually there's some issues in the background that kind of push people off this normal developmental trajectory. Trauma being the most common one of those, but there can be others as well. So yeah, I think there was a second part.
Well, the bit that I added was, can people have these skills and then kind of does addiction shut them down? Because I think some people come in without the skills, but I think some people do come in with skills and just boom, here's the addiction and it takes over.
No, you're right. And I have clients over the years who very high functioning, really successful people. I'm thinking of an attorney now but yeah, they had those skills for sure. And then got involved. They were susceptible. They did have the trauma stuff, but they were susceptible and got involved with some of these really high dopamine addictions, like sex, porn, amphetamines, particularly. Although it could be gambling, it could be other kinds of stuff as well. But when they got involved, it kind of hijacked their lives at that point, and they did indeed start to lose focus at first. Sort of the ability, just their interest waned, and the other stuff. But over time, there are changes in the brain that happen, and some of these are reversible. Some, unfortunately, are not. But with the high dopamine activities like meth, sex, porn, there's a lot of brain changes that happen, and those do affect our ability. For example, and this is true of any addiction, but it's more profoundly with these intensity addictions, the neural connections between our midbrain, where the addiction lives, and our prefrontal cortex, which is the adult in the room, right? That's where we have impulse control and the ability to predict bad outcomes. And it's our sense of us, it's our sense of language, of spirituality, all this kind of higher order things that goes offline. Addiction shuts that down. So there are very real changes that happen in the brain, and consequently in how people function. And hopefully most times people get those back, but I've seen cases, extreme cases, where they don't. And so yeah, there's some changes that can occur.
I love this next question too. My sex addicted ex always said, at least I'm not into porn, after I found out he was acting out. I would never even mention porn, as I only found out about him sexting and attempting to act out in massage parlors. He never denied his sex addiction, but always emphasized porn wasn't his thing. My gut always wondered why he would say this if I wasn't asking. Do you hear this commonly?
Wow, such an interesting question. I think, and yeah, I mean, my clinician hat, when I'm listening kind of between the lines, I do listen for things like this, where people kind of answer questions I didn't ask, where people say, "Oh, I would never do that." And so, yeah, to me, that usually indicates there's some kind of power around that. Now, maybe just an idea, although I suspect it's more in this case. And as we mentioned, I think earlier, we protect that addiction at all costs, right? As Scott mentioned, we make time for it, we plan for it, and we protect it. And this may be a case of that, protecting. And I think every addict does this, where we kind of judge, and it's not rational, but it's like, okay, well, this is okay and that's okay, but boy, that's not okay, at least in my mind, right? And so I would never admit to that. Doesn't mean I'm not doing it. But that's one of those secrets that I'm going to take to the grave, and you're never going to find out about it, because that's so shameful to me. So I think, yeah, I mean, that just the nature of the communication really does raise a whole lot of red flags. And again, if I were a therapist, like, what's the difference? I'd be curious about the mentality and the rationale there. But bottom line is that they're all addictive behaviors, and I think very I don't know, more and more as porn has gotten more Scott was talking about in the early days, and it was truly very different than today, where it's so accessible, it's free, it's private, it's on your phone, it's like instantaneously available. I don't know many people who are sex addicts of one kind or another that are not involved in porn. It may not be their main gig, but I think most people, there's a few maybe that express no interest in porn, but I suspect that's pretty much a pretty common standard component of any sex addict's life. I don't know. Scott, give a thought about that. We've never talked about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, both at our treatment center and in our online sex and porn addiction work groups, we do circle plans. We call them circle plans. And these are basically plans for sobriety. It looks like a 3-circle bullseye. The bullseye is, I call it the red circle. It's bottom line problem behaviors. And then the next circle is yellow, which is slippery, dangerous behaviors that could lead to the bullseye, the red circle. And then the green circle, the outer circle, is healthy behaviors, things you can do instead of the addiction, things you want to, goals for life, and also, recovery-oriented activities. So healthy stuff. So it's bottom line problem stuff, slippery stuff, and then healthy stuff. When we do this exercise with guys, they often want to hold on to 2 things. Oh, it's not a problem. It's not red circle. I'll put it in my yellow circle. One of them is pornography, and the other one is masturbation. And, we have to say, how do you look at porn? Do you masturbate when you look at porn? When you masturbate, do you think about porn? It's like, and generally at the end of the conversation, it slides into the red circle. But it is we want a loophole. I'll give up this, I'll give up that, I'll give up this, I'll give up that. But nobody's going to tell me I can't look at porn or that I can't masturbate. Okay, I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to ask you some very pointed questions about your porn use and your masturbation. And I always encourage people to err on the side of caution. If you're not sure, put it in the red circle, revisit it in 6 months.
Right.
You want me to not masturbate for 6 months, and I have to explain that, parts of their body will not explode if they don't have an orgasm for 6 months. But sex addicts really struggle to fathom, celibacy for more than about 3 days at a pop. So yeah, I mean, I read this, and I was like, yeah, I hear this every time I teach a work group, I hear this. Do I hear this often? Yeah, I hear it a lot. Because guys want to hold on to some vestige of their addiction. Like David said, they'll protect it. They'll lie about it. No, I only look at porn like 10 minutes a month. Really? Really? Can I check
lie to themselves about it too. I mean, we can.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, denial starts in here. It's we lie to ourselves. And here's I think the follow-up to this was definitely on Facebook and more defensive about it. I don't know if this is a follow-up to that, but for me it is, because Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, OnlyFans, yeah, they're social media sites. They're also porn. We call it not porn in our work groups, and in the treatment center, we call it not porn, because technically it's not porn. But if I'm going on there and cruising for images and using them for emotional escape, which is what a porn addict uses images for, it might as well be porn. I mean, personally, I'm on Facebook. That's the only social media I'm on. I do not need to be on TikTok. I don't go cruising YouTube, because you can find stuff there. I don't want to give anybody any ideas. I mean, I don't watch Game of Thrones. For me, Game of Thrones is porn with dragons. It doesn't work for me. Too many people, wearing not enough clothing and behaving sexually. I can't watch it. My sister loves the show. She's not a sex addict. She can watch it. But yeah, David, thoughts on any of that?
No, for sure, because we know this from brain imaging studies, that when people are looking at what Scott just called not porn, right? These sort of thirst trap images on Instagram or Facebook, they're getting a dopamine hit. I mean, they're getting high. And is it as high as pornography? Maybe not, although in some cases, yeah. We've had a couple of people that have come into treatment.
Sometimes I think it's higher because the fantasy effort or the ability to, you can do more with the fantasy
spin it, yeah.
than when they're actually having sex. You can make them into your perfect fantasy.
Yeah.
I think the dopamine can be higher, sometimes lower, sometimes higher. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that we've had a couple of clients come into treatment who don't look at explicit porn, but they only look at these kind of not porn sites, and they absolutely qualify as a sex addict because they're using it in just the way any other sex addict would, which to get the adrenaline, get the dopamine, and they're getting high off these images, and they're not explicit. But as Scott said, they can they engage the imagination and make up scenarios and stories around this, sort of scantily clad but not pornographic image. And it works just fine. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge awareness, because then, and this kind of expands to the dismay of a lot of sex addicts, like, okay, now I got to think about all this other stuff, right? That it's suddenly out there in the world, and we have to really control our thoughts and where our fantasies go, because we can get triggered from anything. And so it becomes much more of a vigilance about keeping track of our fantasies in our heads, where they're at.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We're out of time. We will be here next week, David, correct?
Yes, I will be if you're here.
So I'll be here too. So
Great.
we'll see everybody next week. Whatever you celebrate, have a wonderful holiday.
Indeed.
And we'll see you in a week.
All right. Thanks. And take care, Scott, and see you in a week too. Bye-bye.